We have some breaking news from Trump on the war with Iran. Trump spoke with Israel's Channel 14 earlier, saying Iran wants to make a deal, saying, I think they want to do one very badly. Anybody wants a deal if you are getting decimated, right? Well, Trump was also asked if the U.S. could take control of the Strait of Hormuz, to which he said, yeah, sure, it's already happening. This comes as the New York Times is reporting approximately 2,500 U.S. Marines and another 2,500 sailors have been deployed to the Middle East. This now brings the total number of American troops in the Middle East to over 50,000, 10,000 more than usually stationed there. The Washington Post is also reporting that the Pentagon is preparing for weeks of ground operations inside Iran, according to officials. Quote, any potential ground operation would fall short of a full-scale invasion and could instead involve raids by a mixture of special operations forces and conventional infantry troops. We must note that Trump has made no decisions. Joining us now are David Rohde, MS Now senior national security reporter, and Kian Tajpaksh, professor of international relations at NYU and Columbia University, fellow on the Committee on Global Thought. He's also a former political prisoner who was released as part of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. It's good to have both of you with us. Kian, let me start with you and your reading of the situation this evening. One of the questions that we posed at the top was whether we are going into the beginning of the end of this war or going into a very dangerous potential escalation with an attempt to take control of the Straits of Hormuz, as well as potentially putting American troops on the ground and expanding this war beyond what we've already seen. How are you reading it right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say that there are really long-term kind of strategic logic and coherence to this war. I mean, as I have tried to reframe the way that I see it, and that is to say, instead of thinking that Israel and the United States have started a war with Iran, I think they're responding to a war that Iran started 47 years ago in 1979. And I say that not as a, I know we hear that from the administration, but let me tell you an anecdote. I was, as you mentioned at the outset, I was a political prisoner in Iran. I think I was the longest held American citizen imprisoned by the Iranian regime, over a year in Evin prison and 8 months in solitary confinement under the IRGC, and then 6 years under house arrest before I was released under the 2015 nuclear deal. While I was, I was up close and personal with a lot of the IRGC officers over many years and hours of interrogation. One of them told me something very telling, and I think I've always taken that. And he said, you have to understand that the way we look at the world and the way we look at the relationship between us and the United States, we view that we are at war. And he said, and this was several years ago, he said, we are in a Cold War, but it is a war nonetheless. And he said, you made the mistake of coming to Iran as an Iranian American and not realizing that that's the way we view the United States and Israel. They always have seen themselves in a war. So back to your question, I think that the strategic logic of this war is not just a short-term response to events. I would say one big turning point has led to this war, and that was actually October 7th, 2023. That October 7th attack changed the rules of the game in geopolitics in the Middle East in two main ways. First, the cost to ignoring the proxies and the ballistic missiles was suddenly exposed. That is to say, under the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which, by the way, I'm very grateful for because I wouldn't be free if it wasn't for that. But its flaw was that it neglected the ballistic missiles and the proxies. October 7th revealed that Iran could actually cause mayhem in the region, and the Gaza war was a continuation of that. The second way in which it changed the rules of the game was that Iranian officials explicitly and openly, for the first time, said we should go for a nuclear weapon. And that was because they felt defenseless after the June war that the Israelis sent. That, I think, changed the whole calculus in the Middle East. And when President Trump put these conditions to the Iranians in Muscat, in Oman, 2 months ago, and the Iranians rejected all of them, I think that we were into a place where it couldn't really stop. I mean, in other words, it was something that all U.S. presidents had tried to deal with in one way or other, kicking the can down the road. That would be the most uncharitable way of saying it. And finally, it came to a point with dashing for a nuclear weapon, the ballistic missiles, the Middle East in turmoil, and all that. All of this means that the United States, I think, has realized that it must secure its vital national interests in keeping the Hormuz Straits open, reducing their nuclear weapons, their ballistic missiles, and the issues of proxies. That's why I think the ground troops, in a sense, there is a logic to that. In other words, once the United States has gone down this road, it has to try to, well, maybe not finish the job, but try to defang and weaken Iran as much as possible to protect all its allies in the region. That's the way I would put it.
Well, and that's clearly not possible without ground troops if we're following your logic of what you're arguing. And so, David, you've been reporting on the war machine as it gets ready, and there's significant plans being drawn at the Pentagon that signal this could be not just weeks, but months, in contrast to what Marco Rubio just said at the G7. So tell us what you're hearing about our war footing right now and how serious it is that there's actually going to be ground troops versus a quick targeted operation.
So there's confusion. The problem is that the number of troops that we're talking about, and they're very significant. There's about 5,000 sailors and Marines, as Ayman said, that have just arrived in that area. There's another 5,000 on the way. And then there's 10,000 paratroopers that might come in. That's not nearly enough to seriously threaten Iran. When we invaded Iraq, mistake or not, there was 150,000 U.S. ground troops. So the confusion here is the goal you're talking about, that Kieran's talking about, would take a much larger force. I don't think you have to, invade the entire country and get all the way to Tehran. But the real key issue we're hearing in negotiations is the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. wants it opened. It's how do you make that happen? Do you have to take control of it? And military experts told me it's a disaster waiting to happen if it's just that you take the Marines alone. 2,500 of them are part of this Marine Expeditionary Unit that's there now. That's not enough troops to sort of seize the Strait of Hormuz. And they could take it, but they would then be barraged with rockets and missiles. And that's the disaster that these military officials were telling me. So they're looking for like a clearer strategy from the Trump administration.
Can you talk to me a bit about the terrain, the geography of Iran, and how that complicates matters here, too? I've never been there, but from the analysts and experts and Iranian Americans that we've had on the show, they describe it almost like it's a fortress of mountains that they worry would complicate efforts if American forces were to be on the ground. Can you speak a bit to that, to both just the realities of this massive country and also to what we continue to hear here described as a mosaic strategy, where they have decentralized the military's decision-making, and that could lead to an element of surprise that the U.S. And its military doctrine may not be properly prepared for.
Right. Let me take the second question first, actually. The Mosaic Doctrine was the attempt in the 2000s by the head of the IRGC, actually the head of the IRGC who had imprisoned me. What he decided was that they would, as you say, decentralize and give essentially an emergency plan, that in the case of a decapitation, there would be delegation of full autonomy to commanders in the 31 provinces of Iran. Iran is a huge country. It's bigger than Spain, Italy, and France combined in terms of territory, 92 million people. And these 31 provinces now, it seems, have their own commanders. And so the Mosaic strategy, I think, has been activated. I think what we're seeing now, I mean, one can't tell, but I think what we're seeing is that Mosaic strategy has been activated in the sense that ballistic missiles are being shot all over the place, and some of the leaders inside Tehran you hear conflicting messages from them. Some say we shouldn't do that. Some say we should do that. And I think partly that's because of this this basically delegation to these to this group. This, by the way, is a double-edged sword for the IRGC. It gives them short-term resilience. In other words, they can quickly act and send missiles. But over time, it's going to actually degrade both their morale and their ability to communicate with each other. It is something to watch. The geography of Iran is indeed complicated, but at the moment, the most complex geography for the U.S. forces who are thinking about ground troops has to do with the Persian Gulf. And that littoral area, the southern coast of Iran, is very long, and the Karg Island, which is the 90% of Iranian oil exports go from that, is deep inside the Persian Gulf. So U.S. ships that if they have to go all the way there to get there, it would be exposed, as David said. They would be exposed to fire coming in from Iran. The mountainous area of Iran is on the west and northern part of the country, and that is something that is not immediately, I think, of concern for the ground forces.
David Rodin, Kian Tajbakhsh, thank you so much.